Lee Davis and Gwilym Roberts are the two IPs in a pod, and you are listening to a podcast on intellectual property brought to you by the Chartered Institute of Patent Attorneys.
Hey, Gwilym.
Hey,
how are you?
Very good, thank you. How are you?
I'm really, really good. It's getting near Christmas. This is we're recording this podcast in the run-up to Christmas. Are you feeling like really festive? It always looks to me like you've got a snowflake over your shoulder on that chair you sit in, but it's not, is it? It's just a pattern.
And that's not an anti-work
Up the
statement,
shoulder.
is it?
There you go.
Oh,
It looks-
is it that?
It looks a bit snowflakey.
Oh, that's my grandmother's chair that I had reupholstered.
Did you? Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, the cats went for it instantly.
Oh, I thought you meant that you had inherited it and decided to make it more fashionable or something like that.
No, I did. That's exactly what I did. I should make it. I didn't reupholster my grandmother. I reupholstered her chair.
Oh, okay. Anything exciting happening in the world of Roberts?
You will put the Christmas tree up. There are more fairy lights in his house than I think you might see a slight drop in the national grid when we turn all the lights on in the house now, because Beth was very excited to see them all, so we got a bit carried away. I think we've also
how many lights have you got? Do you know how many lights you've got?
individually, or how many strings?
Yeah.
Individually? I haven't counted that. No, do you know
It
that?
it tells you on the instructions, either on the box or on the little kind of safety label that's attached to your lights, how many individual lights are on there. So
Do you keep your lights in the boxes year after year after year?
no, but I keep the instructions.
The instructions for fairy lights?
Oh, you never know when you're going to need them. So
Plumber. I know there's not electricity, but if you could do plumbing, I think you could plug in a fairy light.
so we live in an area where outside Christmas lights is a big thing, and it's all highly competitive. So I know exactly how many lights I have on the outside of the house.
Right. Oh, is your house? You've got Father Christmas, big inflatable Santa climbing the
Don't
walls?
do that. I don't do the tacky sort of inflatables and stuff like that. It's very tasteful strings
can
of
tell.
lights, and I make lanterns. I buy kind of throughout the year. If I'm in like a second-hand shop and there's like an old ship's lantern or something like that, I'll buy it and then stuff it full of fairy lights so that it becomes its own like unique Christmas feature.
Good grief.
I'll send you some pictures. I'll send you some.
I think you should, yeah.
I've got 7,750 lights on the outside of the house this year.
That's why you've been counting them. Have you counted everyone else's lights just to know?
Oh no, I'm not that ridiculous. And the longest single string I put up was 1,000 lights.
That's unbelievable. How long? When did you start?
I did most of that in one day.
Okay.
I took Monday off this week. You might have seen my out of office. So my out of office went something along the lines of, I'm out of the office. Please don't contact me because I'm doing something really, really important, unless it's a matter of life and death, and you want to drag me off the top of a very long ladder.
Excellent. I see. I can see why you need instructions for 1,000 fairy light string as well. So I retract that.
I'll send you some pictures so that you can appreciate it from afar.
Good Lord.
Podcast today about insurance and IP. How exciting is that? Are you up for this one?
I obviously am. Love IP, love insurance. Bring them together. Holy shamoly. But actually, it is an area I've never. Clients often come and say, shouldn't we get insured? And it seems like a really sensible question, but actually, I'm always a little bit unsure about the answer. So after this one, we will have the answer.
And we've never done it before. This is a new area for us. Yeah,
absolutely.
So it's really exciting. So should we get Lewis on?
Yes.
Lewis, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're really welcome. So your first job, is to help us understand who you are. So tell us a bit about the story of Lewis Parle and who he is and what he's doing.
Okay, well, I'll explain how I sort of fell into IP insurance because, I think you'd find that no one, or very, very rarely do you find anyone that works in insurance wakes up, as a child going, my destiny is to work in insurance. Usually people end up there by accident, not by design. So I was training as a lawyer in private practice quite some years ago and ended up on a secondment at an insurer that was specialising in insuring IP risk. And just so happened they had quite a lot of US patent litigation that they were handling. And I was one of the few lawyers that just happened to be in the business at that time and knew nothing about IP at that point. And they just said, "Oh, right, you're a lawyer. Can you just go and try and sort these out?" And just sort of very, very quickly tried to reverse engineer some understanding of IP law and practice, and really just fell in love with it. And then from there, started working as an underwriter, specializing in IP. So really then making the decisions on what, who can get terms to insure what, and that includes designing new products, and then really kind of exploring where can IP insurance be useful, and took that to sort of the next level in the M&A space, where obviously you can encounter all kinds of complicated IP issues in certain transactions. But latterly, I've become an insurance broker. So I joined a company called Lockton last year to set up an IP risk advisory and insurance practice. So that's where I'm at the moment.
So before Gwilym dives in with all sorts of technical questions, I found the name of the firm quite interesting, Locked In. Is there a story behind that?
Oh, it's locked on or locked in. Well, now you make me feel like there should be. Although there's a lot of locked in puns to do with like locking on.
Maybe I saw a pun. Perhaps that's what I read.
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
I read a pun.
Plenty of those, but no. So so it's a very large international insurance brokerage. So we have sort of like, I think it's about 11,000 people now spread across the globe, but it's still one of the few family-owned sort of insurance businesses.
Oh, okay, cool.
So our founder, if you like, is called Ron, or current CEO is Ron Lockton. So it's a family name.
So, and you find 11,000 people, and you find yourself in a little pod.
Exactly, and in the realm of IP insurance, it's lonely enough as it is. So yeah, I do feel very much sort of one needle in a haystack.
For context, Lewis is broadcasting from a pod. Do you have 11,000 pods at Lockton? Is it like the Matrix?
Yeah. I wish. No, it's very open plan, but I very much love being in these little pods and just shut the world out. Yeah.
Can I also just quickly comment on the idea that most people fall into insurance accidentally? Isn't there some irony there somewhere? Shouldn't you be able to claim against that?
Trip and slip, yeah.
Okay, I'm in. So, the context, as it were, as you know, Lewis, there's a lot of patent attorneys, people in the IP world, generally listen in, and I suspect many people have been asked about. Just broadly, it's an obvious question, isn't it? When I'm doing my due diligence, shall I get insured on this thing? And the IP one comes up a lot. And I've always struggled with it over the years. Well, principally because I had to get my head around what sort of areas of insurance there could be. And I'll kick off and then you tell me if these are all things or not. Because there's insurance against, theoretically, I suppose, against launching a product and being sued for IP infringement. There's insurance for asserting your own IP against a copier or infringer, so that basically your legal costs are covered. And then I think there's other areas, including the one that you do. But can we start off on those first two? I know they're not your kind of what you tend to send out, but do you want to give any kind of comments on the sort of insurances that are out there and what the market thinks about it?
So on the ones you just mentioned, so we do I do actually work in those areas as well. So the way that we've set up, and I'll explain the logic behind it and reverse back into the products because there is a reasoning behind it. The way we've set ourselves up is first and foremost to align ourselves with IP advisors, so of all varieties, so patent attorneys, trademark attorneys, commercial IP lawyers, M&A lawyers specializing in particular areas. Because each of those has its own unique kind of sets of challenges that each practitioner is dealing with. And they all look and feel quite different, then again, depending on the vertical that problem sits in. So what we've been doing over the past year is doing a lot of that groundwork and reversing back into, well, what are the products that these practitioners need to be useful? So what you have referred to there is what you might call, or people used to just call BTE, or before the event type insurances, which I actually don't like that terminology. I think it's confusing. But essentially, you've got those insurances for what I will otherwise call unknown risks. So this is really where one of your clients or might just be business management decided, right, as part of our risk management, we're going to consider putting in place some sort of IP insurance to primarily probably cover off infringement of third-party IP risk. And generally speaking, the market will offer cover for all types of IP infringement or trade secret misappropriation allegations in all jurisdictions. So it's quite broad. And those same types of policies have actually grown over the years to cover lots of other additional risks in some shape or form. So, for example, oppositions, which I think is quite a useful thing that's been added in a couple of years ago. So this is both in the sense of trademark oppositions when you're looking to file and you get to that opposition period, and also in terms of patents. So, post-grant oppositions, or in the US, sort of post-grant reviews and IPRs, that sort of thing. And that's covering legal expenses, not just, obviously, it's not damages. But you're right, on the flip side of that, or it's slightly more rare, because it's quite a different risk profile, because you're effectively giving someone a blank check, is giving someone legal expenses cover to bring claims against third-party infringers. But crucially, at the point they take the insurance out, they can't know there's a third-party infringer, and that's one of the challenges that we've been overcoming with the insurance products. Is there's the products for unknown and known, and it's knowing which products are right for the problem. And quite often, actually, a client might come to us thinking they're going to buy this general before the event type insurance, but actually what they've come to seek insurance for is something they know about. So it might be that a client, for example, is going to license their product, and there might be a patent license that comes along with that, and they said, well, actually, our competitor has just been sued in Germany or the US by this other competitor, and we're slightly worried that we're next. So there's this known element of risk which creeps in, and so then our job is to find the right solution for that, because there's one sort of tripwire, if you like, with some of these insurances, which is for the BTE inverted commas, or the unknown insurance, you have to give a declaration, and there's an exclusion which sits alongside this, which says that the management team and the company or the group don't know that there's any risk, which the underwriter should know about, and if they do know about something, it's also excluded. So our job is then to find the solution for that known matter. So you walk into a different set of insurances, which are very, very kind of narrow specialist tools for specific problems. So they can be really for anything. So you mentioned product launches. So it might be that you've assisted a client with an FTO, and you might have assessed X number of patents, and you've effectively cleared most. But there might be a few where you're saying, well, there's some chances here that claims could read onto your product, but there's ways of working around it. You can do that working around and take the commercial risk, but you can't eliminate all risk. In that case, we might sort of work with you and say, well, actually, we can structure some specialist insurance around that, so the client can, go ahead with their strategy, and then insure the risk that it doesn't quite pan out as they planned. And then you've got, on the other end of the spectrum, you've got insurance around litigation, and more sort of the new kid on the block is using IP as collateral for loans. So what we will do there is look to typically insure, usually it'll be a bank who will be basically using the IP as collateral, probably for some early stage business that's going into commercialization phase. So I'll take a breather, but there's more, but there's quite a lot of different variants, and it's a case of picking the right tool out the toolkit for the problem.
That's a great listing, actually, and I think I quite like the idea of that kind of product list rather than IP insurance, which is generally what we get asked. In terms of that kind of, I know you don't like the phrase, but in terms of the before the event stuff, which is probably what most people think about for, fundamentally, the first question in insurance is, I don't know what's going to happen. How do I get some insurance for it? And I think when you boil it down, it does come down to those two key categories of either being sued or being infringed. It's never really taken off. I mean, my feeling is, over the years, I've been in this for a while, and it comes up every few years, and people look at it, but it's never completely taken off, which is unusual because insurance normally does seem to work. Do you think there are particular problems in their market for it?
I was going to ask you first, actually, if I could be cheeky, why you think it's not worked.
I'm very no. I'm happy to do that, and I've kind of got a kind of a real world answer from something that somebody told me. So I'll give you the answer that kind
Yeah.
of
It's
I
always nice
tend
to be put on the spot as well, which is
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, you love this, don't you? No, I think that the kind of the real world one for me has always been that it's such a case by case thing, and that and also realistically, just getting down to the nitty gritty of what are you actually insuring for? So is it for legal expenses? Is it for damage? And sometimes it's that lack of clarity that people don't have at the outset. I think that's part of it. Also, realistically, the moment you do know what's going on, you can actually come to a very clear-cut idea about what the risk actually is. So it's not, as you say, it's not really an insurance thing anymore. It's a risk management thing. That you might well want to go to a litigation funder at that point rather than a insurer, for example. I don't know. And then the external answer I got is that the sample's too small. It's quite difficult to actually really come to any kind of statistical views on risk without extra knowledge. That's the two things. That's my two answers,
Yeah.
and if that resonates at all.
Yeah, some of those reasonings do, and what I've spent, it's probably 3 or 4 years doing now is spending a lot of time with practitioners in sort of all different guises, working out really what would be useful. And coming back to what you said, and it's sort of the conclusion I came to quite quickly. But I think historically, IP insurance has been presented as this amorphous blob of a thing, which is it appears quite generic on the surface, and I think quite a lot of hand-holding and advisory work is required to help all parties involved figure out where does it fit in the greatest, the grander scheme of business's IP strategy. And it should always have a place, but it takes a bit of work to find that role. So a lot of our time is therefore spent with clients. Actually, I mean, we've been, just to sort of go back, we've in-housed a lot of the industry standard IP tech, so the free to use and the proprietary tools, really, so that when we're talking with a client, we already know the world that they're sitting in, so we can look at the pinch points of risk, and that's what we're talking about. It's we know that you're working in this area, we know this is the environment, and these are the challenges. And these are the specific things that you probably already concerned about or your advisor's concerned about, but we can also see that. And this is where you have your risk management strategy. It might be you've got other risk transfer means. So it might be that you've got partners where you use contracts to do some of that work for you, but actually insurance can then sit on top of all that. So it's being able to articulate that, I think, is the key thing, which sort of helps get over that sort of lack of clarity about what it's for. And it's I think it's being able to switch gears. So our practice in particular is really focused at IP advisors, but quite often we will get C-suite management sort of asking us, without much knowledge about IP insurance, but also maybe only a headline knowledge about IP. And so we sort of have to switch gears to, well, we actually have to cover a lot of bases here on the IP front, plus the IP insurance and risk management front. And then maybe sometimes even direct them to, right, well, you actually should go and speak to a patent attorney on this point, or, commercial IP lawyer on that point. But this is where sort of IP insurance fits in. So I think being able to sort of modulate really the technicality of the discussion is a real help in moving forward the conversation on whether this is a useful tool or not. So it's very rare, in fact, incredibly rare, that I've had a conversation where there's something I've picked up off the shelf and gone, right, there's the solution for you, done. It never works that way. IP is messy. Usually the problems are novel. Solutions have to be novel. And I would say actually half the time, or maybe more, the discussion and the pricing kind of discussion actually crystallizes people's perception of the risk anyway. And they kind of go, do you know what? We now feel that you've priced the risk for us, so we're comfortable to take that risk without insurance. And that's part of our job, actually, is just to help people sort of make a decision what to do. What I would say is there is a cultural difference in approach. So two binaries that we quite often work with are UK clients and lawyers and US clients and lawyers. Extremely different approaches. As you can imagine, the US approach is far more commercially aggressive. And that means in terms of negotiating risk transfer, they're far more aggressive in mandating insurances are put in place, so that, if possible, they push down the supply chain, the risk to someone else, and they've got to go and get insurance. So it's more prevalent in the US to have insurances in place for IP. But also, I think there's a slightly different perceived risk environment. I think most corporates in the US of a certain size have probably dealt with some sort of non-practicing entity claim, and that triggers certain discussions at board level about getting insurance, at least for patent infringement, which then opens up a further discussion. So, and that's less common, I think, in the UK, unless that company's got a large footing in the US and they've had sort of concerns. So I think, that creates some cultural differences in how insurance is used.
Oh, there are so many rich seams here, Lee. I don't know which one to go down. So I'm gonna.
You mine away, Gwilym.
I will. I'll mine away. I'm gonna ask just quickly on the some of the kind of more detailed things then, because actually no. First of all, I wanted to say, Lee, we should have said at the beginning, this isn't about professional indemnity insurance. I think that's fair to say, isn't it, Lewis? That's not your bag.
Not professional indemnity, not car insurance, not your content insurance.
No. So just for the record,
all the things that are the bane of my life, and
yes.
I do spend a lot of time thinking about. I never ever think about IP insurance.
Well, we've got to fix that.
Yeah. Actually, the US one's really interesting, isn't it? I think it's usually the case that things happen there and then they happen here. So with the NPE thing, there are concerns that's coming over here much more with the UPC, for example, and we've actually done a couple of podcasts with some people with concerns about that and some of the kind of products out there. I think the license on termination people and stuff like that. Some of these kind of mitigations out there. I guess, should we be looking? Are you looking to what's happening in the States for models for what you could be offering over here?
So I again, just come back to some of our first principles about how we're approaching this. I don't think it's possible for us to look at IP in a jurisdictional vacuum. I think for us to be effective, and it's a difficult job, is we've kind of got to have this panopticon view of every jurisdiction, because pretty much every week we'll have a client that's got operations or products being sold or customers in every jurisdiction that matters from an IP perspective. And so we've got to know enough to be dangerous to be able to help with each of those territories. But you are right that the US often leads the way with adoption of some of these kind of practices and products. And I think one thing that you mentioned on non-practicing entities and UPC. So we're mindful that there used to be a very specialist product in the market, which was just for cover for non-practicing entities, which was very useful, actually, very effective. So it was quite an actively risk managed insurance product with some specialist claims handlers who sort of knew the ins and outs of the patent trolls and their behaviors. And well, we know that one, if you throw $50,000, it will just go away. Versus this one, actually, you might need to sort of look to some prior art and sort of threaten them with some sort of validation proceedings, and that's sort of come out the market, unfortunately. And so what we've done is try to create a new replacement, but that was focused on the US, and we do know that NPE activity is ticking up in Germany, and it might at some point spread beyond patents as one of the main tools. So there's a very novel case in the open source world, for example, that's going on in the US at the minute, called SFC and Visio, and that could really open the floodgates for potentially even like an open source kind of troll environment. So there's all these kind of moving parts at the minute in different jurisdictions. So we've got to be able to help clients where forum shopping might become an issue. So it's a live matter at the minute.
Thank you. And also, you've mentioned quite a lot about how you and other insurers do your own kind of risk assessment, as of course I'm sure you always would. It reminded me of when you're trying to decide which way an election's going to go, the best people to ask is the bookies, Maybe for an offline conversation, I'd love to know what products you guys are using to help look at the risk side on freedom to operate and things. You don't have to tell me on the podcast, by the way, but that's a really interesting proposition. That, if you want to know the real risks, that's the insurers.
Well, I'm sorry to throw this back again, but so back to first principles point. So it's first and foremost, we want clients that have got advice. To borrow a friend's phrase on this topic, and it doesn't sound too kind, but you'll get what I mean. We're not in the business of trying to ensure stupidity. We want clients to take advice and be smart and know what they're doing with some clarity, and therefore why they're using insurance. What we don't want is insurance to be used as this sticking plaster. Because if there's an imperfect IP position, no amount of insurance is going to fix that business. So it's not a useful tool in place of getting proper advice. I think that's a key message. But in terms of the tools and how we use them, I mean, we're taking a 50,000 view and relying on, patent attorneys to get us closer to the ground. And I know a lot of patent attorneys actually don't like using FTO as the description of what that document does, and we don't normally. I'm just using it as a shorthand, but for us, that is the perfect risk review document, which we can piggyback off. But yeah, we have onboarded. Like I say, the industry. I won't name names, but the main industry standard tools across all IP types to help us make that, I guess you could call it a quick and dirty assessment initially, so we can have an idea about, let's say from a red, amber, green kind of standpoint, where does that client's problem sit, a particular issue. But we're not pretending to be IP practitioners taking the job of IP lawyers. Absolutely not. Our job is to use those tools to be able to interface with the problem. So when we do these risk review discussions with clients, yes, we will, if we found something where we think that might be a concern, we'll flag it, but always with the caveat that we're not giving you advice on this point. You've got your IP advisor; they're the ones that should be giving you some guidance on this. And yeah, so yeah, we're not taking any IP as lawyers' jobs here.
No, and honestly, I think there's risk attached to assessing risk, so I'm really happy to share that. Personally, share that risk. I find that really stressful.
I think this is where I think insurance can be quite useful for a practitioner, because there are ways and means of us, the insurance industry, working with IP professionals that takes the heat out of that advisory work. So, you might have a client where you've got, like say, we go back to an FTO kind of issue, and there's a product launch. You can set out all the different permutations of what might happen should the client proceed with A, B, C, or D strategy, and then being able to sort of then take that to the next level and be able to add on to that. Well, actually, there is this other risk mitigation set of tools that you can use to deal with some of these risks, and that might enable that client to actually have the confidence to progress with that strategy. Is probably something that's really useful, and being able to offhand the risk on that discussion to us or some other broker or insurer is probably quite useful, because you've added some value to the client, and you might have helped them, to use our tagline, remove a barrier to investing in that innovation. And I think that's what we're trying to get to with what we're doing, is enable that to happen, which I think historically hasn't been done effectively.
Thank you. I think I'm nearly done, Lee, because I got those rich seams, but I'm going to go for one more, which is I think you've mentioned a couple of kind of the more the additional tools in your toolkit, as it were, beyond the kind of the amorphous blob stuff. One of them was collaterals on IP as a collateral on the loan. But if I may, I want to talk about the M&A one in particular, because I think that I know you and I have chatted about that before, and that sounded quite interesting, because that's extremely focused but also extremely relevant. So can you just talk through quickly what you're insuring there and how that works?
So this is a really interesting area for a few reasons. So in the M&A space, what's developed over the past is about 20, but let's say it's been absolutely rapidly increased in use, is a product called warranty indemnity insurance in M&A transactions. And effectively what that product does is shift the risk of a breach of the warranties in a purchase agreement away from the seller and onto an insurer. So theoretically, if the buyer buys a business, gets under the hood post completion and realizes, yeah, this isn't quite what we thought. There might be, might be a tax risk. There could be a chain of title to IP problem that rears its head. Instead of suing the sellers, they effectively sue the insurer instead. So it takes the heat out of the transaction, and also if you've got innovative spaces, you've probably got the seller's management carrying on. So you don't want to be suing your R&D specialist going forward. That's not going to make for a happy ship. But one problem that arose in this environment was if you have, let's say, life science transactions or deep tech transactions, or anything where IP is really at the core. Music, creative industry is another one. They get quite complex quite quickly, and the risk becomes obviously very narrowly focused on things like title, validity, and infringement. Quite often we see that insurers weren't happy to insure those transactions. Quite often there would be problems found in those transactions in one of those buckets of risk. And sometimes the diligence scope wasn't always quite adequate to speak to the risk entirely and get everyone a clearer picture about what that does. So what we've spent time doing is finding a way to get those transactions insured. And again, it's trying to find a way to help a buyer get more comfortable to progress that transaction. So what we've seen commercially over the past couple of years after COVID is that buyers on the private equity, VC, and corporate fronts have all been more cautious. So they're doing more DD, taking fewer risks. So they're looking at insurance more and more to shift the risk over. So very long-winded way of saying, what we've started doing is being quite interventionist in those transactions. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So we had in the life sciences space, a transaction where there was quite a substantial upfront consideration and very, very substantial post-completion milestone payments. Should that client target get to certain commercialization points. The buyer had actually done a really, really solid FTO and had identified patents that were at risk. So this becomes a negotiation point then. So the buyer will say, well, we've got this risk now when we acquire this business, and it's going to potentially crystallize, and it's a one product business. If we don't have the ability to sell this product, well, we've just basically wasted all our money. So it's high stakes stuff. And typically that would historically be uninsurable. And the buyer might go back to the sellers and say, well, do you know what? Take X amount off the purchase price. So they lose money. Or they might say, well, the other way of doing this is you indemnify us if this goes wrong. So then the sellers sort of sitting there with the big liability sat on their books. So what we've done in those circumstances is we've actually pulled in patent attorneys into the space to help. Outside of the buyers of the patent attorneys, we've pulled in other patent attorneys to kick the tires on the process and help the insurers come up with a strategy on how to insure that risk, so that effectively that FTO work gets affirmatively insured. So it shifts the heat out of the transaction away from the sellers and buyers negotiation and on to insurer. What's the key bit to this though is, back to that, we're not insuring a stupidity point. The buyer and their patent attorneys have got to have a solid risk management strategy in place and post-completion plan to try and mitigate that risk. And that's where I think the interesting collaboration then happens between what we're doing in insurance and what the patent attorney's role is in these transactions. And that's what makes this work. And so we have had some really quite interesting examples where certain transactions might not have gone ahead if we hadn't had this quite tight partnership with patent attorneys helping us find a way through, I guess, the fog of war, if you could call it, in some of these quite complex patent areas. And that's really what we're trying to do. So it's quite often you might say that the risk is not crystallized, it's not high risk at that point. But when the buyer is looking at this quite substantial sum of money and really pausing for thought, it's how do we get everyone comfortable with that? And this is where we're trying to fit in. So yeah. That's an interesting space.
So, Gwilym, I've got one eye on the clock. As you know, that's my one of my jobs on the podcast, Lewis, when I'm not asking questions, when it's a subject that's so far left field for me that I can't dive in. It's to keep an eye on the clock. But I have come up with a couple of questions. So I know Gwilym and I have both got sort of like a hard stop just before 11 o'clock. But I think we've got a few minutes maybe for me to dive in and ask a couple, Lewis, if that's okay. These aren't going to be difficult IP or insurance questions because I do the elephant in the room questions. So the first one is quite interested in your story. So if I remember right back to when we started this 35, 40 minutes ago, you started off as a solicitor, yeah?
Yeah.
Now, I don't want to call you an insurance broker. I don't know if that's the right thing to call you or not, but that's the world that you work in. Which skills do you draw on the most? Do you still see yourself as a solicitor who happens to be working in the world of IP insurance, or are you a sort of a full-on insurance person?
It's really difficult. So half the time I feel a complete imposter in all worlds. Yeah, there's always this sense of straddling a lot of different disciplines and trying to tie things together. So it really does often require drawing on all potential kind of skills as a lawyer. Thinking as an insurance broker, you're always trying to find solutions and try and find a way for insurers to get comfortable. So you end up having to be a diplomat half the time as well. So it is bringing together a number of different skills, but from the sort of using your legal skills. You're working on M&A transactions. We are negotiating around purchase agreements and the basic stuff, understanding what warranties do and indemnities and how to structure an insurance product. It kind of you do kind of get to keep your skills sharp, but we are further away from the coalface, so knowing where to pass that book back to, in this case you guys, to deal with the complex stuff is key.
And actually, you've segued nicely into my second question, because you said about the distance you are from the coalface. So I was going to say, so in my world, kind of leading CIPA as I do, CIPA membership organisation, patent attorneys, that's my circle.
Yep.
Yeah. And then moving out from that, think about it as kind of like a planetary kind of experience, if you like. You get those other professions that have a relationship or an association. So accountants clearly have a relationship.
Yep.
Marketeers, those kinds of things. I hadn't really thought about where insurance brokers fit in this great sort of planetarium of associated professions. How do you manage those connections? How do you build connections with patent attorneys, and how do you sort of manage that set of relationships?
The patent attorneys, I think, are a slightly more tricky one, because I think that they're maybe inherently a bit more skeptical about insurance. And to be honest, I mean, you can just imagine going to a dinner party anyway, or any sort of social event, and someone asking, what do you do? And you say insurance. It quite often is a conversation killer just right there. So quite often you're just thinking creatively on how to engage in a discussion where you don't actually mention the dirty word insurance at all where possible. But really, like, coming back to what I said earlier, I think this is about meeting the different professions on home turf where possible. So knowing really what are the key issues you might be advising your client on at the minute that are quite topical, and where do we think patent attorneys might wish that they could offer something else, and be able to have that discussion. I think that's really key. And and we all know that. And I'm definitely quite geeky, but also know that patent attorneys are quite geeky, and trying to engage in some of those geeky interests which they inherently have, I think helps. So yeah, trying to bridge together some of those like technical points, and just sort of, again, come back to trying to be a diplomat. I think it's key. Know your audience.
Yeah. That's probably the great point, isn't it? Know your audience. So, Lewis, we're coming to the end of time now. Thank you so much for guesting on the podcast for us. It's and I know this one will go down really well with our patent attorney listeners who perhaps haven't thought too closely or too much about the world of IP and insurance. So they've got this to look forward to. But we always end the podcast with some kind of tangential question. Might be related to something that we've said, and it's always my job to come up with that. And rather annoyingly for me, I've come up with two, and I don't know which one to use, Gwilym. So, Gwilym, one's really Christmassy, okay, ish, and the other one is sort of quite related to things we've been talking about and might be a bit patent attorney geeky-ish. Which way do you want me to go?
Well, looking at knowing your audience, if my 2-year-old were listening and I said, "Do you want to hear about Christmas or insurance?" I'm afraid she'd say Christmas.
Got it. Okay. So let's in the event that Beth might listen to this, or one of my many grandchildren, as you know, let's do the Christmas here. So people wouldn't have heard this because I think you said it sort of off mic just before we started recording. But I'm a bit concerned because the light in the room that I'm in makes me look a bit beetrooty. And you said, "You don't look like a beetroot other than in shape." I think
I feel bad.
So I'm going to ask you, and then I'm going to ask Lewis. Gwilym, what is your favourite Christmas vegetable?
Sprout. Obviously, sprout. I hate sprouts. I hate everything about them, but I think that they embody Christmas in the way that people don't really latch on to. We did a gig once, a Christmas gig, and we called it Sprout. Because I felt it was because almost everything else is. So you got me going here. I was thinking about Christmas songs as well, actually. And there's a Christmas song about almost everything now. You know, if you think of it, everyone's got every angle going. I don't think there's been one about sprouts yet. So, as an aside, not only is it my Christmas vegetable, I think it's an absolute huge candidate for a major Christmas hit.
Well, maybe we should do that. Perhaps that's something we could work on together.
2 IPs and a sprout.
Yeah, 2 sprouts in a pod. Yeah, it works one way or another. Come on, Lewis. So you must have a favourite Christmas vegetable. You look like the sort of person who really loves a Christmas vegetable.
Don't know what to say to that. I'm with Gwilym, but I'm going to one up it. It's got to be sprouts with a lot of butter, garlic, and bacon.
Okay,
Fancy sprouts.
Fried sprouts.
Yeah, no. I'll take that. You going to ask me, Gwilym? Are you going to ask me?
Yeah, go on, Lee. What's your favourite Christmas vegetable?
I'm just going to build on the experience because I'm with Lewis. So for years now, I've been frying my sprouts with a little bit of garlic and bacon and butter. But last year I added cheese sauce. And that transformed even. I do love cauliflower cheese, and I didn't have any cauliflower in the house at Christmas. I thought, let me try a sort of a Brussels sprout cheese, and it was amazing.
I see, and I'm guessing you have all the windows open and let that smell wafts down the road, so that everyone knows that not only have you got the best lights, but you got the best sprouts.
If you say so. Of course, I have this ongoing issue with nasal polyps, so I have nozzle. I can't even say it. I can't smell at the moment, so I'm not even going to appreciate the Christmas smells this Christmas.
Oh no, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, no sense of smell. Lewis, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure having you on. Gwilym, I will see you on the next recording, which is very soon. In fact, we've not too long to wait.
It's 3 hours, yeah.
but we'll just remind our listener that if he or she wants to leave a nice sort of review on the podcasting platform of their choice, then it'll help other people find the podcast. And also we're hoping that Lewis is going to plant this around all of his various insurance contacts so that we break the world of insurance.